I want to welcome all of you to the Historical Society's special meeting this month. Dr. Nancy Hendricks will now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll stand, please.
Thank you. Please join me, ladies and gentlemen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You've all received the minutes from the last meeting. Do we have a motion for approval? Fred, second was, all right, Elmer Barrett is second. The minutes will be approved as read. Thank you very much. Now we're going to hear from our Executive Director, Liz Robbins.
Hello. First, I'd like to invite you to our next program, which will be on Tuesday, April 18th, right here at the library. Lisa Goodwin will share stories and photographs of actually growing up at the Majestic Hotel. Her father, Leo Wolf, was the general manager there for 28 years, and Lisa has unique and entertaining memories. And thank you for being here today. We're very grateful to our co-sponsor, the Gateway Community Association, and community partners, Roanoke Church, Hot Springs chapter of the NAACP, Unlimited Resources, and Web Community Center for their help with the events today. And don't forget, one of those events is a reception for Tim from 4 to 6 this afternoon in room 201 at the Convention Center. That's the main floor, with all the pictures up and down the side. It's going to be a great party, so we hope to see you there too. Now I'd like to introduce some wonderful people you'll be hearing today. A special guest who'll be helping with today's program is Elmer Beard. As an educator for over 40 years, he taught at the primary, secondary, and college levels, including teaching English at National Park College and Arkansas Baptist College. He's the author of 2 books, including one of poetry. He challenged local businesses and government agencies to hire Black employees in the 1960s, and he later served 8 two-year terms on the Hot Springs City Council, where he helped secure funding to build infrastructure throughout the African American community. Thank you for being with us here today. Also with us today is Jean Lacefield, Development Officer and past President of the Gateway Community Association. She's a Hot Springs native. She retired 8 years ago from PepsiCo as the Group Manager of Supplier Diversity, promoting inclusion and growth among minority and women-owned businesses throughout the company's supply chain. She previously held managerial positions with Pfizer, Conoco, the New York City Transit Authority, and Temple University. Now, in her position with Gateway, she has been absolutely instrumental in the development of the Malvern Avenue Improvement Project. And she's committed to the Hot Springs community through her involvement with a host of local and state organizations. And today, she's going to be interviewing our special guest, Tim Spofford. And of course, Tim is the author of What the Children Told Us. And we're very happy that Tim's wife, Barbara, also traveled all the way from Florida to be here with us today. Tim has taught writing and journalism in schools and colleges and has a Doctor of Arts in English degree from the State University of New York in Albany. He's published articles in the New York Times, Newsday, Mother Jones, Columbia Journalism Review, and other publications, including our society's annual journal, The Record. And in one of his articles for us, he profiled E.S. Lockhart, the publisher of the African American newspaper, The Echo, And in another one, he collected the memories of African Americans who told about segregated life in Hot Springs. He's also the author of Lynch Street, a documentary account of the 1970 killings at Jackson State, a black college in Mississippi. Now, I'm sure he'll be telling you all about how he became interested in the Clark story, but I can testify that he is a killer researcher. He spent a lot of time at our archives when he was researching, and we quickly came to appreciate his dedication and his skills. His abilities as a researcher and also as a wonderful writer, because you know those two things don't always go together. But they're both on display in what the children told us, and we're very glad he's here with us today. And with that, Jean, I will turn the podium over to you.
Thank you, Liz, and thank the staff of the Garland County Historic Society for bringing this story to life. When Liz asked me whether I would be could I be the moderator, I was humbled and excited and honored, and then I said, wow, what makes this story compelling? Why do we need to know this story? And I thought about it. It's a point of connection. Are there high stakes involved? And then what's the reason why we should care? And when I started to think about it from a personal level, the point of connection, you're going to hear the story of the Phipps life and where they touched all around this community. And the Douglas Elementary School is one of the places where the actual test was done. I attended Douglas Elementary School. In addition to that, that school is across the street from my current residence, which is my family home. And I bought the land 6 years ago and have assigned to Douglas School. So who knew the connection? So in addition to that, I'm a Langstonian. I went to Langston Junior High. So when we talk about stories, what makes it important is that personal connection. High stakes, you can't get any higher than the Supreme Court. So, and this story has that connection that Tim's going to tell us about. And the reason why should we care? Our history matters. Everybody has an opportunity to have a contribution to our local area, our city, our nation as a whole. So with that said, on with the show and start asking Tim the questions. So I'm going to start with Tim. And Tim, thank you so much for doing this book.
Well, thank you, Jean, for doing this. And can I also thank Liz Robbins, who's been absolutely wonderful when I first came here about 14 years ago, and putting all this together, and the supporting agencies that have also helped, the library, Roanoke Baptist Church, I believe the NAACP, the Web Center, all these groups come together to make this happen. I am just so impressed. I can't tell you how gratified I am to see the support here that we have today for this book and for these wonderful people. This was quite an extraordinary couple. Thank you to everyone for showing.
Okay. So with our first question, Tim, how did you get interested in the Clarks and the doll test?
I got interested the way an awful lot of people got interested, sitting in a psychology class as a kid. I was 17 years old. I was attending Plattsburgh State College in New York, up near the Canadian border, sitting in a room much bigger than this, an auditorium. It was dark, darkened auditorium. And with a spotlight on him, my psychologist, young psychologist, professor, a white man, rather attractive, red hair, young guy. And he talked about this test, the doll test, and Kenneth Clark, and how Kenneth offered two black dolls and two, brown dolls, I should say, brown, and two white dolls to children, ask them questions like, which is the nice one, which is the bad one, which is the one you want, which is the one you want to play with, and so on. And finally, the last question was always, which one looks like you? And Dr. Dustin, I still remember, I mean, that was a long time ago, more than 50 years ago. He told me that, he told all of us, about 200 of us in this room, that 2/3 of the children opted for the white doll, and they were all black children who took the test. Only black children took this test from the Clarks. 2/3 opted for the white doll. And I just thought, wow, that is tragic. I mean, it really stuck with me. And I guess I had reporter's genes and have a memory for names and faces, and never forgot that name, Kenneth Clark. But Kenneth helped me remember, because Kenneth, I was an avid New York Times reader, and Kenneth practically bought space in that newspaper. He was in it constantly, and not quite often on the front page. And so it was really easy to follow his career. I grew up in the Albany, New York area. That's the capital region for the state. And he was on the Board of Regents there. And so he was a very outspoken, controversial figure on the Board of Regents. That was the school board for the whole state. And not only the K through 12 schools, but all the colleges and all the universities and all the schools, whether private or public. It was a very powerful board. And when they spoke, I mean, it really made news. And he was the most outspoken of that board, and the only black man, and the first black man to be on that board ever. So so I taught many years, and then I've always been kind of an education junkie, and I wanted to cover education right after the Nation at Risk report was out, which really made education reform big news. And so I went to work for the capital city newspaper, the Albany Times-Union, and got to meet this guy, Kenneth Clark. And I went into the Regent's chamber, very ornate, high ceiling, granite walled, very elaborate, huge chandeliers room. And on the walls were these pictures, these famous regents, powerful men, like maybe you heard of a couple, Alexander Hamilton, does that sound familiar to you? And John Jay, signers, these were founders of our nation. And then there was this little humble, round-shouldered old man, 70 years old, soft-spoken, and yet everybody was deferring to him. And I mean, he was just such a historic figure. I was impressed, got to interview him that day and sat down with him for about an hour and a half. And the first thing I did was extend my condolences because a Hot Springs native named Mamie Phipps Clark, his wife, had recently died. And he put it, I'll never forget, he put his hands on his stomach and he said, "Oh, I feel like I've lost an organ." And I knew these were historic people, I mean, historic figures, and influential in their own time, famous. And I said, somebody's got to write that book. Somebody's got to write a biography of these two. And that's how it happened. And a few years later, I asked him if he'd help me out. And he said, sure. He sat for about a dozen interviews, and here we are.
Okay. So can you describe Mamie Phipps in Hot Springs, her parents, Dr. Harold and Katie Phipps, and Mamie's grandparents, and the Smiths on Walker Street?
Sure. We're going to click through some pictures here and see what we've got. Okay. These are the Phippses, Mamie's parents, Katie and Dr. Harold Hilton Phipps, and that's them over there on the left as well. Here to your right is the picture of them at 302 Guard Street. That's right on the corner. It's the big brick bungalow with the porte cochere. It still stands. I was there a couple of days ago. As soon as I got into town, it was the first place I went. And they were aristocrats of color. They were, by the standards of their caste and class, and especially in the Depression era, they were rich. And how did they get that way? Well, one way is that Dr. Phipps worked full-time, 2 jobs, full-time. He was the manager of the Pythian Hotel on Malvern Avenue, and he was a physician with an office right off the lobby of the hotel.
They can't hear him in the back.
So another reason why, he invested in a lot of property, owned quite a bit of property in town. And another reason why he became rather affluent and influential is that a lot of people in town worked in the bathhouses and had good jobs. Black attendants.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Tim, you need to move your microphone up closer to
Sure.
your mouth because they're having a little trouble hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Why don't I just hold this? Is that better?
Yeah, can you work the clicker too? Good.
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the reasons Doc Phipps was so prosperous is that in this town, a lot of Black people worked in the bathhouses and got good tips, reasonably good wages. And so they were able to pay the doctor for his services. In a lot of communities in the country, that isn't quite the case. And I suspect that's one of the things that lured Doc Phipps to Hot Springs as soon as he finished his degree at Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. Okay, Katie on the left, she was also very helpful in running the hotel, but also she ran this house behind her. 302 Garden Street served as a kind of elite B&B for the runoff. If they ran out of hotel rooms, she would take in guests there, but also some of the real creme de la creme of the Black community in the nation would, rather than stay at the hotel, stay at this house and eat all their meals with them. So Mamie, sitting at the table, got to listen to all these really smart people talking about really important things, and she just took it all in. She just absorbed everything. She was a great listener. Okay, well, why don't we go to the next picture? I think, I should add, they were both officers in the NAACP. I mean, they're both really active. And Katie was a leader in the Alpha Art Club, which was a kind of offshoot of the National
Association of Women's Clubs.
Thank you. I was fumbling for that. Why don't I go to the next picture here? I'm left clicking Liz and it's not cooperating. Should I right click? Why don't? Oh.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Put your finger there and move it toward you whenever you want to change.
Oh, this?
The round thing.
Okay, all right, let's try that. I must be going the wrong direction.
There you go.
Okay, here's Doc Phipps, probably around 1908. That's when he arrived in Hot Springs. Note that Anita Biscuit ad on the building behind him. Okay, well, let's see. All right. Here he is. This is probably, I imagine, a photo that came compliments of Happy Hollow. You'll notice the number on the bottom, and that's a pretty good giveaway that that's what that is. I don't think that's his horse and carriage because he had a car. He was one of the early people in town to have a car, and he preferred Cadillacs, by the way. Okay, here he is. There's the Pythian Hotel on his left, and that is gone now, sad to say. And this is him in retirement, and he moved into this building. I don't know whether he had it built or whatever, but when he was no longer the manager, he moved in this building and ran his medical practice out of it. And I understand that he tended to lend a lot of money to people. People would come in. I don't think he would call him a loan shark, but he was a fairly generous guy and helped out. However, he was a kind of a bit of a stuffed shirt, I gather, rather dour, very formal. He was an immigrant. He came from St. Kitts, and I'll have a picture of him there for you in 1 second. This is his wife, Katie, as a child at Happy Hollow. Katie Smith at the time. And I imagine she's about 11. Okay. This is Katie's family up on Wahoo Street. Fascinating family, fascinating. It's a vacant lot up there. I went up there a couple of days, yesterday. I went up there, and the house is gone. But it was apparently quite a show place. It was a rather, as you can tell, kind of a big house. And apparently they had all kinds of beautiful gardens and flowers and flowering shrubs. And the Katie, Doc Phipps' wife, she's the young, very attractive girl up there on the left. She went to, here she's probably, I guess, maybe 14. She went to Spelman College. She didn't graduate, but she spent some time there. Her dad is Jesse Rufus Smith, and he was a deacon at Roanoke Baptist Church. Very active in the Pythians also. And he and his wife, younger wife, Mamie, she was 22 years younger. She was a second wife for him. His first wife died. They both ran together. They managed what was the earliest Pythian hotel, to my knowledge, in Hot Springs. It was called the Crystal, and it burned in the big Great Fire of 1913. And then they went back to working as attendants in the bathhouses and hotels in town. But I want to tell you that Jesse had been enslaved in Virginia, and he left Virginia after the Civil War and went up to New York State, a town, Nyack, and then he gravitated south again to Philadelphia, where he was married and had a daughter, I believe. But at the time, Arkansas was the cool place for Black people to move after the Civil War. It was hailed as a kind of beacon of freedom, and they came. And he went to work in the bathhouses here, and then that made him a natural to run the Pythian hotel known as the Crystal. This young man here with blonde hair, he is African American. He's light skinned. This is summer photo, and so he's rather dark. Usually, most of his pictures are very, very light. And his name is Alfred Smith, and he became a rather notable member of FDR's so-called Black Cabinet, which was headed by Mary McLeod Bethune, who helped found the organization that you just named. There's another interesting family story here. Henry up there with the bare feet on the right. Henry stole the Pythian Hotel's silver and skipped town. So, most family members, most families do have a ne'er-do-well, and it wasn't the first time. His mother gave money to go get some groceries, particularly a loaf of bread one day. He never showed up again. He skipped town. So he did it twice. One thing is very funny. Katie Smith Phipps wrote a letter to Mamie one time, and I read it, and it was hilarious. She said, "You'll never believe it. Henry got married. Imagine that. Henry got married." This is another picture of Mamie and Mamie Smith. And I love this picture. Her maiden name was Johnson, by the way. She attended 2 colleges, one in Nashville, I've forgotten the name of the school, And she also went to Spelman. Didn't graduate again, but she did spend some time at both those colleges. You can see she's a rather stylish person, very, very handsome. And I think she probably was very instrumental in shaping things up at the Crystal Hotel, getting the decor just right and the decorum as well. She was very big on politeness, the Victorian virtues of Christianity and education, reading and manners, and also she ran a tight ship. Every child had a bunch of chores up there on Wahoo Street. They had animals, they had a horse in a carriage, they had cow, they had a number of other farm animals, imagine a pig, that sort of thing. She ran a tight ship. That's what her son said. Okay, let's try another. All right, so Mamie is born, by the way, on Church Street in a cottage that her father owned. She was the second child in the family. The first was Harold Hilton. And there they are, both of them. In that picture on the left at St. Gabriel's School, which was a rare integrated school in this city. It was run by white nuns. There's a black teacher, as you can see. And Mamie's in the front row there on the left, and her brother Harold is right behind her. So this was a very tiny school. I gather from what Ida Fort Thompson told me, I don't know if you knew her, but she said the nuns were very kind and very good teachers. Here is Mamie and her brother again. I'm not sure if they're on West Mountain there or on the outskirts, one of the mountains on the outskirts of town, but their mother took them in the car, family car, Cadillacs, all the time for picnics and family outings. Often to Malvern, too. She had a really good friend down in Malvern who had a little tiny farm, and Mamie loved going down there. Okay. Mamie this is her at class, fourth grade class at Langston. She's in that bottom row, fourth, and she's got her arms crossed on her lap. She's wearing white stockings and has boots on, which were common at that time. She's wearing a, what would we call it, jumper, I guess? Is that the right term? Yeah. And her lips are pursed. That's her. Now, black schools, I don't want to sugarcoat this. History should not just be nostalgia. Nostalgia's fine, but let's face some facts here. This is segregation. This is a segregated school. It was underfunded. This is a class of 44 children by my count, and that's an awful big fourth grade class. Kids got hand-me-down textbooks from the white schools. If there was a typewriter in the school, it was a hand-me-down from a white school. There was no gym, no auditorium. When she graduated, eventually she had to do it at the Woodman of Union Hotel, which is still in town. They had a big auditorium there, and that's where her graduating class had to go. So no playing fields. They had football teams in later years, and they wore hand-me-down uniforms from the white school as well. So those are the facts. The black teachers in town, as Elmer told me, were paid less than the white teachers in town. The schools were funded at a lower level, and yet Langston School was a really quality school by the standards of black schools in the South at the time. The building was rather large, 12 classrooms, solid of brick, and many rural communities, I'd say most rural communities throughout the South, had no high school whatsoever. And there was no access at all to a diploma to black children in those remote regions, unless they had a relative in a city where they could go and live with the relative and manage to get into the the city school there. Okay, let's move on here. And this is Mamie. As you can see, she was a very pretty, very charming girl, extremely popular. I think this was a picture of her the year she became what they call in town, a sub-debutante. Because you notice that I don't think she's dating this young man to her left. I think he's quite a bit older than her. And it looked like maybe his mother dragooned him into becoming her escort for this event. I mean, he doesn't look real enthusiastic. This is her graduating class. And Mamie's up here in this second row, third from left. And here's a close-up of her. And you'll notice she's the only person, she's quite popular. She's the only person in the class that someone is actually touching for this picture. She was the president of her senior class. Family lore says that she was the valedictorian. I don't have any proof that that was actually true, but there were only two kids who were on the honor roll. She was one of them, and she was the only one who actually performed. She did a classical music piece on the piano for graduation on class night. And what I want you to know is that she was the head of several clubs. She helped organize a big dance to raise money for the library because the school library didn't have much. And by the way, Mamie would never have gotten into this building in her day if this building had existed. City library was closed to all Black children. So these are the, nostalgia aside, this is the way it really was. She performed, she headed a group of girls who did dances, and they performed at the I guess it is the main theater in town, still exists, I guess it's the Malco now. And there used to be, last time I was here, 14 years ago, I think it was, there was an outdoor staircase, and that was the Black entrance. You had to go up into the Jim Crow balcony. That's where she had to sit. But she got the manager of the theater to allow her and her girlfriends, who had this little dance troupe, to perform between movies, because usually you had double features back then. So, okay. All right, this is the Clark family. And Kenneth's father is that young man up there in the back row to the right with the boutonniere and his lapel. His dad, Walter, is there in the suit and with the flower in his lapel as well. That's not Kenneth's grandmother. These people, by the way, she was a second wife to this gentleman, Walter. And this was taken in Cologne, Panama. Kenneth was an immigrant. Kenneth Panama was a Spanish-speaking nation, and family members would be sent to, all the family members would be sent to Jamaica to get an English education so that they didn't have only Spanish. They were lured to Cologne by the fact that the Panama Canal was staged there. In other words, that was on the Caribbean Sea, a port, and all the materials for the canal had to be brought either through the Pacific side, Panama City, or through Cologne. So that's what built that town, the the Panama Canal. And his grandfather and his father both were supervisors on the docks.
So Tim, how did the Clarks meet? And what were the adult Kenneth and Mamie Clark? What were their personalities like that you found in your research?
Well, they met right here, Howard University, where Mamie was, again, very popular, a leader, and she was on the student government. I'll put it that way. And here she's being crowned May Queen. The interesting story, this is where they met, and the interesting story is that she and Kenneth married on the sly, made their wedding secret, and that's a big story in the book. And she was oddly she was voted in May Queen by the student body. At the very time, she'd been married about a week, and she became May Queen. Now, I think you know something about the May Queen tradition. These are usually virginal young maidens, and that was not the case here. And furthermore, if you know anything, if you're a certain age and you know anything about colleges back then, including my own, you were not allowed to get married. And it was her senior year, and she could have been kicked out. So she was a proper young lady. She attended a charm school. She had she had a certain way of walking, was rather distinguished and aristocratic. She dressed to the nines. She was very quiet though, and was afraid. She had stage fright. It was a phobia really that she had lifelong. She was extremely quiet, high strung like her dad, the physician, high energy like him. But had this problem with a phobia that really troubled her all her life. And she was nervous as hell at this. And her mother was there. So about a week after she's married on the slide, her mother shows up for this with the dress. And this is the picture that Kenneth kept on his desk while he was a student of her. They were separated in the summer. She had to come home. This is before the marriage. She had to come home, and he was an inveterate, habitual smoker, and he would be smoking, writing letters to her, and looking at this picture. And as you can see, she was a doll. And here they are. I believe this is at the Missouri Pacific Depot. Kenneth was a very different person. He was pretty forceful, outspoken like his mom. He wasn't an arm waver. He didn't shout, didn't howl. He was very soft-spoken, but he was a pretty aggressive guy. He was a New Yorker. She was the diplomat, thank God, of the family. He was not a diplomat. He was tough, and it tended to a flaw. And but they had a lot in common too. They both had a parent from the Caribbean. They both loved jazz. They loved dancing. They're both super smart, big readers, hell-bent on getting a good education. And they both went to Columbia University, got PhDs in psychology. It's an Ivy League school. They were the first Blacks to get PhDs in psychology. And there wasn't another Black psychologist with a PhD from Columbia for about 40 years. Sure. Okay. There's Mamie in Hot Springs with their 2 babies. The thing I want you to know about her, this tells you a lot about her. She had 2 babies, and she gave birth to a PhD in 4 years. So she's nursing the children, she's cleaning the diapers, and she pulled all that off with a PhD in 4 years. Just imagine. Now, the average PhD, the last I knew, took about 7 to 8 years. This is them on Malvern, her mom and her daughter. That's little Kate. Here's Kate again on Malvern. You had street photographers back then, and a street photographer took that picture. Let's see, I haven't got that right, huh? Okay, this is them in the 50s when they've really achieved fame already. She's only about 28, and he's about 31 when this picture was taken. And they have founded Northside Center for Child Development, a psychiatric center for Black children, not Black, it was integrated. So it's children of all races, including Chinese and Hispanic youths. And in Harlem, and it still stands to this day and serves thousands of children. Okay, she, by the way, by 1965, she helps found Head Start. She and only 12 people with no help from secretaries. It was a shoestring operation. No help from secretaries or White House aides. She and 11 other professionals sat down with Sergeant Shrivers. He was the head of the War on Poverty. Sat down with his pediatrician for his family, and they hacked out all the guidelines pretty much for the operation of the Head Start centers nationwide. And if Head Start programs look anything like Northside Center, and they do, a lot of the things that were built in that program from the start had their beginnings at Northside Center. For instance, very fundamental lessons in reading, for instance, and healthcare, doctors, eye doctors as well, hearing doctors, the whole bit. That was all part of Northside Center from the very first when the child came in for care, and that was also the case for Head Start.
So, Tim, now we're getting ready to segue to what was the doll test and how did it work? So we're going to get to kind of the thrust of her work.
These are famous pictures that appeared first in Ebony magazine. They were taken by the famous photographer and film maker Gordon Parks. Now, I'll bet a lot of us in this room have seen the movie Shaft. Well, that was his movie. He directed that movie. And maybe fewer, but some of you perhaps saw The Learning Tree, another fine film by Gordon Parks. But he was like the photographer in New York at that time of African American heritage. And he was a friend of the Clarks. I should say the Clarks had almost anybody with power in the civil rights movement in the 60s and even in the 50s knew the Clarks and knew them well. They worked with them. They were friends and colleagues, had them over for dinner, and that included the Kings, who slept in their home. The Kings and the Clarks vacationed together in the Caribbean once. Very, very influential in the Black community. He was a resource for almost anybody with power lane. Take Roy Wilkins of the NAACP, Whitney Young of the Urban League. All these people knew him. Okay, the doll test, which I unfortunately moved away from for a minute. This test basically offered the child, as I said before, a white doll and a black doll. They got to choose. Now, actually, he used 2 white and 2 brown. But for simplicity's sake, Gordon Parks sort of recreated or simulated the test here and just chose one of each color. Okay.
So then let's talk about, in the experiment, just a few simple questions for the doll test. But the first doll test was conducted where in Hot Springs?
Well, it was given first in Springfield, Massachusetts. What Kenneth wanted to do, he didn't want to test in New York City, where he's from. He wanted to find a heartland community. Springfield, if you've ever been to it, it was a pretty good sized city, still is. And it was in the country, really. And so was Hot Springs, really. And so I think he was trying to balance a community with integrated schools and a community with segregated schools, which was Hot Springs, and test Black children in both to see if the results might be a little different because of that difference of discrimination and segregation. So here in Hot Springs, it was conducted at the Douglas School and also at the Goldstein School.
Next picture.
Huh?
The next picture.
Oh, okay.
It'll show the Douglas School.
All right.
There you go.
Oh, that's it. Okay. Okay. I haven't seen this picture, so this is news to me too. And did you attend that school, that
I
very
did.
building?
Yes, and that's a picture that was donated to us from Mrs. Elizabeth Jackson, which was a teacher at Douglas School.
Oh, I'm glad we have it. This is a picture here in town. And Kenneth, this was the winter of 1941. This is a couple days probably after Christmas. So this is around January 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. And this is 302 Garden Street, Mamie's childhood home. There's the porte cochere. There's his car, Doc Phipps' car. And you can see baby Kate, who was recently born. She's there in the arms of her grandfather, Doc Phipps. What I think this shows is Mamie is about to get into the car, go to Missouri Pacific Depot, and take a train back to New York so she can resume her studies at Columbia. Meanwhile, Kenneth is going to be staying with his in-laws, whom he was on kind of rocky turf with them, because after all, only about 2 years before this, you know, he got married in secret. She wanted him to marry her in town only after she finished her master's degree. Well, that didn't happen. But in any case, the master's degree did happen eventually, and so did the PhD. And they got along famously afterward. But he was staying in the house, going to the Douglas School and the Goldstein School to conduct a doll test. He also did some testing at the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. The limited number he needed, this is a smaller community, he needed more test takers, and he went up also to Little Rock and did a few tests up there to add to the numbers. And he found, by the way, not much difference in his results between the integrated United States community of Springfield and the strictly segregated community of Hot Springs. He didn't find much difference in the results at all. And the segregationists who fought the Clarks and Thurgood Marshall in the Supreme Court and in the federal courts made a big deal of that, saying, well, if segregation is so bad, then how come there isn't all that much difference between the results of a segregated school system and an integrated school system?
So at this point, I'd like to give you guys a feeling for what the children were feeling at the time. I'm going to read from his book. And this is Freddie B. at Douglas School, age 5, dark skin, and he was more even-handed in his doll choices. He selected a brown doll as both the one he wanted to play with and the nice doll. He also picked a brown doll as bad, but then changed his mind and turned to the white doll instead. He decided if he was black, Freddie said, well, he was asked whether he was black, and Freddie said yes. He said, my grandma is black. Would you like to be white or black? I would like to be white, he responded. Why? Like to be white, that's all. So you can understand these are from the words of the children.
You have to understand that this was a very different country in 1940. Not that all our problems are over by any means. But you know, frankly, the only black people who got into a newspaper were crime suspects. And I emphasize the word suspects. And in the glossy white magazines, same thing. I mean, you just did not see them. You did not see them on television. I'm old enough to remember of being like shocked around the mid-60s when black people started showing up on television. Bill Cosby on I Spy, that show. I mean, there just weren't a lot of positive images of black people presented to us. There were images that you'd go at the Missouri Pacific train station, for instance, and there was the colored waiting room, which was not anywhere near as nice as the white waiting area. So I think you need to realize that those factors played a big role in these test results. The black schools at the time, for instance, particularly in rural areas, rural towns, where the white high schools were brick and they had flush toilets and they had nice water fountains, machine shops, things like that. Well, then the black school, the black families had to buy the land together. Together, they had to kick in and build a building, sometimes by themselves, actually put the nails to the boards. And the school boards, white school boards tend not to fund the schools very well. They did not contribute in many cases to the fuel for the pot-bellied stoves. The white kids had central heating, but the black kids got pot-bellied stoves. And sometimes the black children had to scoop up the coals that fell on the wooden floors so that the school didn't burn down. The roofs tended to leak. There were outhouses that the children had to use. Sometimes for a school of like 500 to 800 children, only 2 outhouses. A dipper, a bucket of water on the front steps with a dipper for the children to drink from instead of a water fountain. This was not uncommon. And in any case, the Clarks got involved with Thurgood Marshall, and they testified in federal courts and played a key role in moving the Supreme Court to rule unanimously against school segregation, to open up the schools to black children and to Indians, to Mexican children. I mean, segregation was not just in the South, it was in the North. Some of the states that had segregation laws for schools were like Delaware and Kansas, which were border states. They were not deep South states.
So now we're going to have Mr. Beard read a passage from your book about from the Supreme Court case.
In this book, Tim tells the story of the Clarks receiving the news of the Supreme Court's 1954 decision, as Tim relates. On Monday afternoon, May the 17th, and that was about 1 p.m., a secretary interrupted Kenneth during his class with a phone call. When he picked up the phone, Thurgood Marshall's excited voice came over the line from Washington. "Kenneth, we did it, we did it." Kenneth's heart pounded like a crib hammer as Marshall told him that the United States Supreme Court had ruled unanimously that segregated dual school systems were unconstitutional. Marshall noted that the court had cited Kenneth's research in his decision. When Kenneth finally read the document, the words of the decision seemed to echo what he has been saying for years about black students. The court wrote, to segregate them from others of similar age and qualification slowly because of their rare race generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community that may affect their lives and minds in a way unlikely ever to be undone. The ruling added, we concluded that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. No one expected all 9 justices to strike down the state-sanctioned school segregation. It was the United States Supreme Court ruling of that century, a threat to segregation in all walks of American life. For the Clarks, it was one of the happiest days of their life.
Thank you, Mr. Beard.
Very, very well done.
So now, Tim, was the dog test, I'm going to ask you a series of questions about the dog test so that we won't have to interrupt you. Was the dog test widely accepted in its day, or has it always been controversial? Do researchers still conduct the dog test today? And would the test results be the same if it was conducted today?
Okay, the first question was,
Why did?
Was it
Why?
controversial? It sure was, right from the very start. Even, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was very controversial from the very start. Even the NAACP lawyers who were fighting for the Brown decision fought over some like William, oh gosh, he was in the treasury. He was in the Nixon cabinet, William Coleman Jr. He actually really fumed about it. He was answering anything about it, and quoted often. He felt that the Supreme Court they're never going to go for this doll test thing. This is a joke. And as a matter of fact, in the oral arguments before the court, the segregationist candidate for president in 1920 against Calvin Coolidge, John W. Davis, he mocked the doll test in front of the Supreme Court. So the court really did know about this test. In any case, where was I going with this?
That was the controversial, and then.
Oh, okay. Well, we still fight about it. We still fight about it. First of all, social scientists are in the business of fighting. Okay, that's the very next social science study that isn't disputed or debated in some way will be the very first in history. All right. So yeah, it's very controversial today, and I have to tell you, I really do believe I probably am not welcome in some places because this is a very sensitive subject, very sensitive. And Kenneth, by the way, felt the same way. When he gave his first speech in New York City as a young man on this subject, the inferiority complex, he wasn't sure he was going to get away with it. But he was accepted. In fact, he was invited to give the same talk several other venues in New York City.
Do you think the results will be the same today if the test was done?
I should answer that second question you had first, which was, is it done quite a bit elsewhere?
Yes, the research.
All over the world. This test, I looked on the internet, I think last year, and was surprised, pardon me. I have a nasty case of asthma. I looked on the internet last year, and there was a film of the doll test being performed in Italy. It's been performed in Union, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and I think Trinidad and Tobago. So it right to this very day, and a lot of times even amateurs, children, a girl named Carrie Davis, now a woman, a teenager, she did a test and had it filmed and went viral on the internet. So it's been just done everywhere, all over the place. And
With the results today?
results today, starting in the 60s, the late 60s especially, because of the Black Pride movement, Black Power movement, the Black Arts movement, all these aspects of our very, very active culture back then, it heightened the pride, Black pride, and the results started showing changes. More children, or Black children, were choosing the black doll, the brown doll. And I also have to say that starting in the early 50s, but the results weren't published till maybe the late 60s or early 70s, the test was done on white children. And the tests were very disturbing. The results were very disturbing for white children. Because back then, white children felt pretty comfortable using racial slurs to describe Black people. And so those results are really disturbing to read. And Anderson Cooper, pardon me, soon after Obama was elected president, a lot of journalists were saying, hey, what do doll test results like?
Sir, I'm sorry, could you speak up a little?
Sure. I guess I gotta get real close. I'm sorry. Anderson Cooper, his show on CNN, after Obama was elected twice, he did week-long series on the doll test, using scholars who tested children in this century. And what they found was that a lot of the white children still had these prejudices, and they were pretty straightforward about it. And their parents were present. Their parents were mortified. I mean, they were just so embarrassed because the audience included Black people as well. I mean, it's on television. Millions are watching this, and they were mortified. But, this is out there. I mean, racism is out there, and we're still learning it, and breaking bad habits is very hard to do.
So are the clocks renowned only for the dog test and the Brown versus Board of Education?
Great question. And no, Kenneth, picture here. Kenneth became, I might be going the wrong direction.
There you go.
Okay.
There, right there.
No, first of all, they became rather famous for Northside Center. People from around the world and across the nation have gone to the Harlem clinic of the Clarks to see how it's done. And so a lot of they're often called child guidance centers, sprang up to help troubled children around the country. Not as many as the Clarks wanted, and none that I know of in New York City. Mamie here is giving a dedication speech for a huge urban renewal project that she headed. She spurred, it was her idea, she pushed, and you can see the results today. This is a gigantic complex, the Schaumburg Plaza complex at the corner of 5th Avenue in New York City and 110th Street, which is the first street in Harlem. And it's right at the corner with Central Park. So that's how you can remember, you can find it. And this is this gigantic building with 600 brand new homes for families. It was integrated, it was an integrated complex. And the whole idea was to spur development and business and integration in Harlem, Southern Harlem, Central Harlem. And it was done in a neighborhood adjacent to Farley Circle neighborhood, which was adjacent to Spanish Harlem. So you had a lot of Hispanics move in. And it was across the street from the Upper East Side, which is white. So some whites moved in. And this was all her doing. It took her 10 years. She worked like hell to get this done. If you know anything about the construction business in New York City, building anything is really hard, what she did. And here is a picture of Northside Center today. And here is the Duchess of what? Windsor?
Duchess of Cambridge.
Cambridge, okay. Here she is. Is it Kate?
Kate. Yeah.
I can't remember her name. And this is Thelma Dye, who is the executive director of Northside Center and has been the director for, I think, about 30 years. And she's been, Mamie was also the executive director for about 30 years. So, but as I said before, I want to emphasize this. Mamie had an awful lot to do with Head Start. Mamie served on all kinds of very high-powered, prestigious boards in New York City, corporate and public boards, on the board of the New York Public Library. A lot of rich people would kill to get on that board, and she was on it. ABC Broadcasting Network. She and Kenneth went to the Montreal Olympics on ABC's dime because she could do that. MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, which is one of the finest art museums in the country. She was on that board. She promoted the inclusion of Black artists in these museums. In that museum and others, because she was a president of a board called the Museum Collaboratives, which advocated for museums in the country. She advocated for Black businesses to be able to do business with these institutions. Mamie and Kenneth were fierce advocates of Black people their entire lives, right up to the end of their healthy days. And Kenneth became the most prominent Black scholar of his era. He was the Henry Louis Gates of his time, and his time was a time of, well, if you remember what we used to call the race riots, the 1960s, the civil rights, the heart of the civil rights era. He was the one who was on television all the time and in the newspapers, big, small, and in between, explaining to, especially puzzled white people who could not figure out why are these cities on fire now when Blacks are finally gaining their rights. And Kenneth tried to explain that, sometimes people get really, really angry and vicious once you remove the boot from the neck. So this was Kenneth's role. He was the explainer, the interpreter between the races about what was going on back then. He founded the first Black think tank, the Metropolitan Applied Research Center, and he brought Martin Luther King in and Whitney Young and Roy Wilkins and people like that through it. He helped found a war and poverty agency. Head Start was a war and poverty agency that Mamie helped found. He helped found Harlem Youth Opportunities Unlimited, to get young people jobs to help rebuild Central Harlem. He wrote a best-selling classic, Dark Ghetto, which was translated into about just short of a dozen foreign languages. And it explained what it really informed people why the ghettos existed. People didn't realize that federal, state, and county laws forced Black people to remain in the ghettos, did not allow them to enjoy FHA loans and be able to rent in public housing the way white people could. So he was the one who was, he, Mamie, and Ella Baker, a very famous Black activist, the three of them really made school segregation in New York City, and it is a problem in New York City to this day. They put it on the map, not only in the city, but nationwide, because they held a huge public relations campaign to point out to the city school board and the mayor and the city council just how segregated the schools of Harlem and Brooklyn were and what shabby shape they were in compared to the schools that white kids went to in the city. They put school integration on the map.
Okay, we have a couple more photos. And
this is the Clarks toward the end of their lives. Kenneth had just retired from that Black think tank I mentioned, and he just retired from teaching psychology at City College, which he was doing only part-time while he ran the think tank full-time. Mamie was still running Northside Center when this picture was taken, but she retired about a year or so later. She didn't feel good. She didn't know it, but she had terminal lung cancer. Hilton there on the left, this was a family consulting firm. They all had shares in it. Hilton worked in it full-time, and he eventually became a city councilman in New York City. Very prestigious job. And Kate there on the right, she eventually, after her mother left, and another person took over, but then left as executive director of Northside Center. Kate took over Northside Center.
okay,
Is that all pictures
no,
we have?
we have some more.
Oh, yeah, here's Mamie in Black Enterprise magazine. She was often sought out for her opinions on raising children in a way that might make them free of prejudice. Here are other pictures of the Clarks, perhaps in their 50s or early 60s. and I think we're done.
So,
What an incredible job
So I want to thank you for all the research you have done on this. And I think now we will open up, we will have a video presentation online where we will have Phyllis Brown, the baby sister of Minnie Jean Brown Trippy of one of the Little Rock Nine. Oh, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. We've got a picture of Minnie Jean. Somewhere in here.
You're going the wrong way.
Oh, let's see. Is it at the top?
No, it's in the end. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
I should mention that Mamie knew the mentor of the Little Rock Nine, and am I blanking out on her name just now?
Minnie Jean Brown.
No, their mentor.
Daisy.
Thank you, Daisy.
State
Bates.
president in ACP.
Exactly, and co-editor with her husband of the newspaper, the black newspaper in town. Well, anyway, Minnie Jean Brown was the most outspoken of those 9 children who endured the incivility and mistreatment of white racist students and their parents out front of Little Rock's Central High School. One day, Minnie Jean was called an N-word by one of these racist, it was a girl.
Can you speak louder, please?
Okay, I'm terribly sorry. Minnie Jean, one day, a student in one of the Little Rock Nine at Central High School, she was mocked. A student used the N-word, hurled it at her, and Minnie Jean shot back with white trash, and which was her right, in my opinion, but the school authorities saw otherwise and expelled her for doing that. So Minnie Jean Brown could not attend any school within the city limits. That meant the end of her education. Okay, so what the Clarks did was, the Clarks, who had met Minnie Jean and her mother earlier up in Little Rock, during the crisis, the Clarks, Kenneth called up and asked Minnie Jean's mother if she would like to send Minnie Jean to live with the Clark family in Hastings-on-Hudson. They lived for many years in Harlem, but then they moved to the suburban little village of Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. And the mother agreed, and Minnie Jean and her mom flew to New York. And Minnie Jean became very, very, very famous among the New York press. Every time she graduated or the last day of school, that kind of thing, they'd send a reporter out and tell her story. This is her, that picture was her in the Clark's living room in Hastings-on-Hudson.
How long did she live with the Clarks?
She lived for 2 years with the Clarks to get her diploma. She enrolled in a private school in Harlem and did fine. And then after she finished in the fall, she began a nursing program at Mount Sinai Nursing School in New York City.
Okay. So at this time, Paul is going to connect us with Phyllis Brown. And we will have some words from Phyllis, telling us about what was it like, what she remembers as a sister of their relationship with the Phipps.
What do I remember? about the Phipps, particularly Dr. Mamie Phipps Clark. But let's keep in mind, I was 8.
And we're
Uh,
hope the technology
however,
gremlins are not bothering.
They've been after us all day today.
We're way past turn it off. It's wired.
So while Paul is getting us together, I want to ask Tim, you spent a lot of time doing this research. How long, you did an outstanding job of going through and uncovering points about the life of Mamie and Kenneth Clark. How long did that take?
More than an insane man would spend. I spent the better part of 15 years working on this, and I'm still working on it because I'm going to different groups like this around the country and giving this talk. So, but it was my pleasure. It was my privilege. There's nothing quite like being a white person who's from an all-white town to be able to sit down with Black families and discuss these issues, a lot of times over a dinner or a lunch. And some of these people were very old. They speak to you in this book from the grave because they've died since. This is a great pleasure for me to talk to these people.
Hi, Phyllis.
hi. Actually, it's a great pleasure for me also.
Well, Phyllis, welcome. You're here at the Garland County Library. And we have an audience full. We are approximately 100 here. So please, we're having a little bit of feedback.
Congratulations. I'm glad so many people came out. Are you
The
hearing
Phipps
me?
family.
I'm going to ask the question. Do you hear me?
We can hear you.
You do hear me? Nod your head. Oh, great. All right. And so you have questions for me? All right.
Tell us
Now I'm not
about
hearing. Go ahead. Tell us.
Go ahead.
So Phyllis, tell us about your family connection with the Phipps family.
All right. Keep in mind, I was 8, turning 9 when the 1957 crisis at Little Rock Central High started. So I was still riding my bike, playing with my puppy dog, being a child, and all of this erupted. What I do remember is that my mother and father received a phone call from Dr. Kenneth and Dr. Mamie Clark asking if my sister, Minnie Jean, who had been expelled from Central High, could live with them in New York and finish her education. The tragedy was I was losing a sister, a big sister. And my biggest concern was who is going to dance with me? Because I no longer had a dance partner. I could no longer go into her bedroom because she had a beautiful bedroom with the sun flowing in and a beautiful pink Chanel bedspread and a hi-fi. That's what it was called back then, was a hi-fi. And listen to her Johnny Mathis records and listen to the Platters. And now my sister is leaving me. Who was I going to dance with? And she left. and went to New York to live with the famous Clarks. I do remember Dr. Mamie Clark being a very gentle, gracious, sophisticated, elegant, and educated woman. So I'm going to let you ask me the questions. Can you hear me? Hello? So I'm not hearing you, Jean, so I'll just continue to talk. Since I'm looking at you, just nod your head. Yeah. Oh, gosh. I do remember it was December 1957. The Phipps came to Little Rock and went to visit her brother in Pine Bluff, Dr. Harold Phipps. It was during Christmas time. We went to their house, and I had never seen a Christmas tree so huge. It was fascinating. I remember that. And I remember being surrounded by all of these prestigious educators. Her brother was a dentist. She and her husband. It was fascinating. It was all right. So you asked me the questions. What's your question to me?
Really
I'm not
laid out
hearing you.
what the
I'm sorry.
everyday
Say it
life
again.
was like for the Phipps. What did you take away? What do you take away from that now in current day?
Well, I am going to respond to that question by saying that my sister was extremely distraught for having to leave the the members. I don't like using that word members because members seems to imply that they were part of a club. She was very distraught having to leave her classmates. And I tease her even now to say, you were distraught? Living with the Clarks, you had dinner with people like James Baldwin, Lena Horne, Harry Belafonte, and Thurgood Marshall. What could you be distraught about? But she does tend to lament the fact that she had to leave home. But I'm thrilled that she had the opportunity to leave Little Rock and dine with these great intellectual giants and to live with these intellectual giants and have the experiences that she had at a young age. Oh, and so your question said, how do I correlate the doll test to now? Is that your question? I'm sorry. What's your question?
That, if you'd like.
Say it again. Ask again. Ask your question again because I didn't hear it.
Answer that question, Phyllis, if you'd like. How would you correlate the doll test today?
The tragedy, in my opinion, is that particularly Black women still strive to identify with a white beauty standard. If that were not true, in my opinion, they would not ascribe to identifying to that basis of beauty in terms of their hairstyles, the way they dress, they don't embrace their Black woman self. They're still attempting to identify with a beauty standard that is not authentically their own.
Well, Phyllis, thank you for
Yes.
joining us via technology. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let's give Phyllis a round of applause.
Oh, I get applause? Oh my, no, no applause. Please, no.
Hi,
Any audio, I can't hear.
we have IRB now, we have informed consent when it comes to participants in research. So kind of what were the conditions of research? Because now we have best practices, but we know that historically Blacks have undergone experimentation and it hasn't always been great. So kind of what were the conditions of the dolls test in that day and time?
Well, what a great question. None of the protocols that we have now existed then, and there was a kind of a fallout or shakeout because of that. Kenneth felt really guilty. Some of these little Black children cried during the test. Most of them enjoyed it as a contest, a game, but some of them didn't because it came too close to home and it hurt their feelings and they cried. Some fled the room. He felt really guilty about it. And some of the children, there were other things other than just the doll test. There was a coloring test component. There was a drawing test. But they were actually taking, this is Mamie's idea, the coloring test. And Kenneth, that was his favorite test. And he watched these little children use a crayon to color a drawing of themselves, a boy, the color, and a girl, the color that they wanted themselves to be. And very often they would select a light color or what Kenneth called a bizarre color, orange. And Kenneth actually felt really guilty about that. He felt like he was putting them through a lot of anxiety. So there are reasons for those protocols to exist, and they didn't exist back then.
Did they get permission from the parents to participate?
I know he got permission from school authorities because I've seen the letters, but whether it went back to the parents, I kind of doubt
Mr. Beard?
Yes. What was the relationship, if any, between I'm Black and I'm Proud by James Brown and the dollar test?
I don't know I can address that directly, but I can, within the context of the times, the whole Black arts movement. James Brown was all part of that,
Thank you, sir.
and that the importance of the Black aesthetic, Black values, Black beliefs, Black businesses, the Black church. I mean, all of that was fermenting and bubbling in the 60s in a way that it really had. Everybody was rethinking who they were and how they behaved. That included whites at the time. So it was an interesting period. To use a woman, RESPECT. Right? I mean, that was all part of that too.
Very appropriate.
Well, I think this concludes our review. Thank you, Tim. This has been outstanding.
Thank you, Tim and Jenny, for the wonderful program. We We hope that you all will be able to come this afternoon at 4 o'clock to the Convention Auditorium, room 201. You can park in the parking lot across from the AME Church. Come right in that back door. The Convention Auditorium will be right there in our room. 4 to 6. Our meeting's adjourned. Thank you so much.
Could I make an announcement? If by any chance you would like a copy of the book, I will be selling them for $20. I can't take any credit cards. If you have a check or cash, there's no profit involved. That's my call. Thank you.
Also, be sewn up front.
Also, Mr. Beard has some books if you would like to go to the back table and that are available.
Susan, can you turn on the mic, please?